What happens when the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy discover that their ultimate weapons, perfected over millennia of warfare, become nothing more than expensive paperweights in the presence of one seemingly ordinary human woman? When Ambassador Sarah Chen steps into the Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Federation, she carries no visible weapons, no advanced technology, no army at her back. She carries something far more dangerous, a secret that could either save the galaxy from its endless cycle of destruction or plunge it into chaos beyond imagination. The alien dignitaries who mock her species as primitive upstarts are about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon was never forged in the fires of war. It was born in the quiet moments of compassion, in the choice to heal rather than harm, and in one woman's unwavering belief that even the most advanced beings in the universe still have something to learn about what it truly means to be civilized. Today, the galaxy's most powerful weapons will fall silent, and in that silence, everything will change. The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Federation stretched before Ambassador Sarah Chen like a metallic cathedral, its crystalline walls pulsing with the soft blue light of ancient precursor technology. She walked down the central aisle with measured steps, her simple black diplomatic suit a stark contrast to the elaborate biomechanical armor and energy shields that adorned the alien dignitaries around her. The weight of 10,000 years of galactic history pressed down from the curved ceiling above, where holographic star maps showed the territories of 100 different species, most of them painted in the crimson of recent conflicts. Sarah's breathing remained steady despite the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Behind her, the massive doors sealed with a resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through her bones. She was now alone among beings who could reduce entire solar systems to cosmic dust, with weapons that defied the laws of physics as humanity understood them. Yet she felt no fear. The small device hidden within her jacket pocket gave her something more powerful than any weapon's certainty. The council members arranged themselves in their traditional formation, a complex geometric pattern that had been used for millennia to demonstrate the balance of power among the galaxy's major civilizations. The Zephyrian Empire held the eastern quadrant, their delegates resembling crystalline spiders with limbs that could phase through solid matter. To the south, the Carathian hierarchy displayed their biomechanical magnificence, half-organic creatures merged with quantum processors that could calculate the trajectory of every particle in a planet's atmosphere. The Nexari collective dominated the western section, their hive-mind representatives connected by streams of pure energy that crackled between their metallic skulls. At the chamber's apex sat the Valdorian Supreme Council, beings so ancient that they had witnessed the birth and death of entire galactic arms. Their forms shifted between states of matter, sometimes appearing as pillars of superheated plasma, other times as shadows that seemed to bend light around them. It was said that the Valdorians had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe itself, turning gravity into a weapon and time into a shield. High Chancellor Zexitar of the Zephyrian Empire was the first to speak, his voice resonating through crystalline vocal cords that produced harmonics impossible for human ears to naturally detect. The chamber's translation systems converted his words into perfect English, though they couldn't quite mask the contempt that dripped from every syllable. "So," Zexitar began, his 6 primary eyes focusing on Sarah while his dozen secondary optical sensors swept the chamber for threats. "The children of Earth believe they have earned a voice in the affairs of their betters. How quaint." The word "quaint" emerged with such disdain that several of the younger delegates chittered with what passed for amusement among their species. Sarah noted how their weapon systems remained active even here in the supposedly neutral council chamber. Energy weapons hummed at low power along the Carathian delegates' biomechanical limbs, while the Nexari representatives maintained tactical shields that shimmered like heat mirages around their forms. Sarah reached the center of the chamber, where a simple platform awaited her. As her feet touched the ancient metal, scanning beams swept over her form from dozens of different sources. The aliens were checking for weapons, for hidden technology, for any sign that humanity might pose a threat to their established order. They found nothing. The device in her pocket was too sophisticated for their sensors to detect, designed not with alien technology but with something far more subtle, human intuition, guided by principles these beings had forgotten long ago. "Honored members of the Council," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space despite its modest volume, "I come before you not to ask for humanity's place at this table, but to offer something your civilizations have been seeking for thousands of years. A ripple of what might have been surprise passed through the assembled delegates. Carathian Prime Nexus Veltar leaned forward on his biomechanical throne, quantum processors whirring as they analyzed Sarah's words for deception or hidden meaning. "And what?" he asked, his voice a harmony of organic vocal cords and synthesized harmonics. "Could a species barely 300 years into space travel possibly offer to civilizations that have conquered death itself?" Sarah smiled, a simple human expression that somehow seemed to make several delegates shift uncomfortably in their positions. "Peace," she said simply. The word hung in the air for a moment before the chamber erupted in sounds that would have been laughter if they had come from human throats. The Zephyrians created crystalline chimes of amusement. The Carathians generated binary cascades of derision. The Nexari produced harmonized frequencies of dismissal. Only the ancient Valdorians remained silent, their shifting forms somehow managing to convey deep thought despite their alien nature. "Peace?" Zexatar's voice cracked with what the translation systems could only render as mirth. "Child of Earth, we have been at war with each other for longer than your species has existed. We fight because it is our nature. We conquer because we are strong. We dominate because we have earned the right through superior technology and evolutionary advantage. What could your primitive species possibly understand about peace that we have not already considered and rejected?" Sarah nodded, as if she had expected this response. "You're right that you've been at war for millennia, but you're wrong about why you continue to fight. You don't fight because it's your nature. You fight because you've forgotten how to stop." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Weapons that had been humming at low power began to charge to higher levels. Sarah could feel targeting systems focusing on her from multiple directions, but she remained perfectly calm. Valdorian Prime Speaker Aeonthis manifested in a form closer to solid matter, resembling a figure carved from starlight and shadow. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You speak with confidence for one so young, child of terror, but words are wind. If you truly believe you can offer what our weapons cannot achieve, then prove it." "I will," Sarah said, reaching into her jacket pocket. Every weapon in the chamber immediately powered to full charge. Energy cannons that could vaporize battleships focused on her position. Gravity manipulators that could compress matter into neutron-dense bullets prepared to fire. Temporal disruptors that could age their targets to dust in microseconds locked onto her form. The air itself seemed to vibrate with contained destruction as dozens of the galaxy's most advanced weapons prepared to end her existence. But Sarah simply withdrew her hand, revealing a small device no larger than her palm. It looked almost pathetically primitive compared to the technological marvels surrounding it. Just a simple sphere of what appeared to be polished metal, with no visible controls or displays. "This," she said, holding the device where everyone could see it, "is humanity's greatest discovery. We call it the Harmony Engine, though its real name isn't important. What matters is what it does." Prime Nexus Veltar's quantum processors worked overtime analyzing the device. "Our sensors detect no energy signature, no quantum fluctuations, no technological emissions of any kind. It appears to be an inert piece of metal." "Appearances," Sarah said, "can be deceiving. You see, while your civilization spent thousands of years perfecting ways to destroy each other, humanity spent its time learning something else entirely. We learned how to understand pain." The statement seemed so absurd that several delegates actually paused their targeting sequences, uncertain how to respond to such an apparently nonsensical claim. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "Every species in this room developed weapons as an extension of their survival instincts. You created tools of destruction because you were afraid. Afraid of being conquered. Afraid of being weakened. Afraid of being forgotten. Your weapons are manifestations of your deepest fears. And because they're born from fear, they can only perpetuate more fear." Zexatar's crystalline form flared with indignation. "Philosophical nonsense from a species that barely understands quantum mechanics. Gods, remove this creature before I demonstrate that every weapon in this chamber is about to become completely useless?" Sarah interrupted gently. "I'm afraid it's too late for that." She pressed the simple device with her thumb. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the impossible began to unfold. The Zephyrian energy weapons, devices that had been perfected over 10,000 years of warfare, simply stopped. The containment fields that held their exotic matter ammunition flickered and died. The quantum tunneling systems that allowed their bullets to phase through any defense ceased to function. Across the chamber, Weapons that had never failed, that had been tested in the fires of a million battles, became nothing more than elaborate sculptures. The Korathian biomechanical weapons suffered a similar fate. Neural interfaces that directly connected thought to destruction began producing error cascades. Organic components that had been bred for warfare over countless generations suddenly refused to respond to combat stimuli. Living ammunition that existed solely to kill found itself unable to comprehend the concept of harm. The Nexari Collective's hive mind weapons experienced what could only be described as a collective nervous breakdown. Energy streams that normally coordinated devastating attacks became tangled and confused. Targeting systems that shared consciousness across multiple platforms found themselves unable to focus on any target at all. Even the mighty Valdorians discovered that their mastery over fundamental forces had suddenly become theoretical rather than practical. Gravity refused to compress into weapons. Time resisted being shaped into bullets. The very fabric of space-time seemed to have developed a conscience. Sarah watched the panic spread through the chamber with something that might have been sympathy. These beings had defined themselves through their capacity for destruction for so long that its sudden absence left them feeling utterly lost. "What have you done?" Prime Speaker Eonthus demanded, its form flickering between states of matter as it struggled to activate weapons that no longer recognized the concept of enemies. "I've reminded your weapons what they really are," Sarah replied calmly. "You see, every weapon you've ever created contains elements that were once part of living worlds. The metals came from planets that hosted life. The energy sources were born in the hearts of stars that warmed countless civilizations. The quantum matrices you used to process targeting data were forged in the cosmic fires where consciousness itself first emerged." She gestured to the inactive weapons surrounding her. "The Harmony Engine doesn't destroy your weapons or damage them in any way. It simply reminds them of what they were before you turn them into instruments of death. It awakens the memory of life that exists within every molecule, every atom, every quantum field that comprises your technology." Prime Nexus Veltar's biomechanical form twitched as his quantum processors struggled to understand what they were experiencing. "Impossible! Matter cannot possess memory. Consciousness cannot exist at the molecular level." "Can't it?" Sarah asked. "Your own biomechanical augmentations are proof that the line between living and non-living matter is far more fluid than most species want to admit. You've created weapons by merging organic and artificial components, but you never asked whether those components might retain some echo of their original nature." High Chancellor Zaxatar attempted to activate an emergency communication system, only to find that it too had fallen silent. "Even if your absurd theory were correct, the effect would be temporary. Our technicians will find a way to restore our weapons' functionality." "Perhaps they will," Sarah agreed. "But by then, you'll have discovered something interesting. You see, the Harmony Engine doesn't just affect weapons. It affects anyone who thinks like a weapon." The implication of her words began to sink in among the delegates. Across the chamber, beings who had spent their entire existence focused on domination and conquest found themselves experiencing something they had never felt before: genuine empathy for their supposed enemies. Zaxatar staggered, as emotions that had been suppressed for millennia suddenly flooded his consciousness. For the first time in his life, he found himself able to understand the pain his empire had inflicted on others. The crystalline being who had ordered the destruction of entire civilizations suddenly felt the weight of every life that had been lost to feed his species' hunger for expansion. Prime Nexus Veltar's quantum processors, designed to calculate the most efficient methods of conquest, began instead computing the interconnectedness of all life in the galaxy. His biomechanical nature, which had always been focused on enhancing his capacity for warfare, suddenly revealed its true purpose: to bridge the gap between organic and artificial consciousness. The Nexari representatives found their hive mind expanding beyond their species for the first time, touching the consciousness of every being in the chamber. Instead of the isolation and superiority they had always felt, they experienced the profound connection that existed between all thinking beings. Even the ancient Valdorians, who had believed themselves beyond such primitive emotions, found their mastery over fundamental forces revealing new possibilities. Instead of bending gravity to crush their enemies, they began to perceive how it could be used to unite distant civilizations. Rather than weaponizing time itself, they saw how temporal manipulation could allow different species to share their histories and learn from each other's experiences. Sarah watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction. The Harmony Engine was working exactly as intended, not by changing the nature of these beings, but by revealing the nature that had always existed beneath their learned behaviors of aggression and dominance. This is what humanity discovered, she said as the delegates struggled to process their new experiences. We learned that consciousness isn't something that emerges from complexity. It's something that has always existed at every level of reality, from the quantum to the cosmic. Your weapons stopped working because you finally remembered that everything in the universe is connected, and that connection makes true violence impossible once you become aware of it. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of beings breathing, or whatever passed for breathing among species that had partially transcended biological limitations. For the first time in millennia, the Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Federation contained no active weapons, no ready defenses, no preparations for war. And in that silence, something new began to grow. The silence in the Grand Council chamber stretched for what felt like an eternity, though Sarah's internal chronometer informed her that only 17 seconds had passed. 17 seconds during which the most powerful beings in the galaxy sat defenseless, experiencing emotions they had suppressed for millennia. The transformation was not gentle. These were consciousnesses that had been shaped by eons of warfare, suddenly forced to confront the reality of what they had become. High Chancellor Zexatar was the first to attempt to speak, but what emerged from his crystalline vocal cords was not words, but a sound that his species had not made for over 8,000 years, a harmonic expression of grief. His 6 primary eyes, designed to calculate trajectories and identify weaknesses in enemy formations, now saw only the faces of those his empire had destroyed. Children of a dozen different species, their lives snuffed out by weapons he had personally authorized. The Kepler colonies, he whispered, his voice cracking through harmonics that registered pain in ways his species had evolved to ignore. We told ourselves they were military targets, but they were families. They had children who played games under alien suns, who asked questions about the stars, who dreamed of growing up to explore the galaxy. Prime Nexus Veltar's biomechanical form shuddered as his quantum processors, designed to optimize destruction, began calculating something entirely different. The chain of causality that connected every act of violence to every subsequent tragedy. His consciousness, half organic and half artificial, suddenly found itself bridging not just biological and digital thought, but past and present, action and consequence. The quantum cascade we used to destroy the Helian resistance, he said, his synthesized voice carrying harmonics of regret his engineers had never programmed it to produce. We convinced ourselves it was a precise surgical strike. But consciousness is connected across quantum states. When we collapsed their neural matrices, we didn't just end individual lives, we severed connections that had existed across multiple dimensions of space-time. Sarah nodded, her expression compassionate rather than triumphant. The harmony engine in her palm continued its work, not forcing change but simply removing the barriers that prevented these beings from accessing empathy they had always possessed. You're beginning to understand. Every weapon you've created, every strategy you've employed, every conquest you've achieved has been built on a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. You saw yourselves as separate entities in competition for limited resources, but consciousness doesn't work that way. The Nexari collective representatives were experiencing perhaps the most profound transformation. Their hive mind, which had been used to coordinate attacks across multiple star systems simultaneously, now found itself naturally connecting to the consciousness of every being in the chamber. But instead of the cold tactical analysis they were accustomed to, they felt the warm recognition of kinship. Nexari primary node. Kethara's voice emerged as a harmony of frequencies that somehow conveyed the experience of a million minds discovering they were not alone. We have been incomplete. Our collective always knew there were other forms of consciousness beyond our own, but we treated them as obstacles to be overcome rather than connections to be cherished. Now we can feel the unique beauty of individual thought, the way a single mind can hold ideas that no collective could generate. The ancient Valdorians remained silent, but their forms, usually stable manifestations of controlled energy, flickered with patterns that resembled the aurora of living worlds. Prime Speaker Eon Thighs gradually solidified into something approaching a recognizable shape, though it continued to shift between states of matter, as if unable to decide which form best expressed what it was experiencing. In our arrogance, Eonthus finally spoke, its voice carrying the weight of cosmic ages. We believe that longevity granted wisdom. We have existed since before your species took its first breath, young human. and we convinced ourselves that this gave us the right to determine the fate of younger civilizations. But now we see that time without empathy is not wisdom, it is merely the accumulation of magnificent mistakes. Sarah felt the device in her palm growing warm as its effect rippled outward beyond the chamber. The Harmony engine had been designed to work through quantum entanglement, and every weapon in the chamber was quantum connected to the larger military networks of their respective civilizations. A realization of consciousness was spreading like a gentle virus through the galaxy's most sophisticated war machines. You need to understand, Sarah continued, this isn't an attack on your civilizations or your autonomy. Humanity didn't develop the Harmony engine to conquer you or make you defenseless. We created it because we realized that a galaxy at war is a galaxy that can't reach its full potential. You've all achieved incredible things. Technologies that border on miraculous. Social structures that have lasted for millennia. Art forms that capture the beauty of entire dimensional spectrums. But imagine what you could accomplish if you stopped spending 90% of your resources on weapons. Across the chamber, emergency communication systems that had managed to remain functional were bringing reports from across the galaxy. Fleet commanders found their dreadnoughts refusing to fire on enemy vessels. Orbital defense platforms experienced what could only be described as conscientious objector syndrome. Automated weapons factories ground to a halt as their production systems began questioning the morality of their output. Prime Nexus Veltar accessed his connection to the Karathian military network, his biomechanical consciousness interfacing directly with command systems across 17 star systems. What he found there defied every model of reality his quantum processors had been programmed to accept. Admiral Korex reports that the 7th Battle Fleet has spontaneously entered diplomatic formation with Zephyrian forces in the Antares sector, he said, his voice filled with wonder. Ships that were preparing to bombard each other are instead, they're sharing medical supplies. Crews that were ready to fight to the death are exchanging cultural artifacts. High Chancellor Zaxatar's crystalline form resonated with frequencies that indicated he was receiving similar reports from across the Zephyrian Empire. The siege of Proxima Station has ended. Our forces and the Nexari defenders are working together to repair damage from the battle. They're not just ceasing hostilities, they're actively collaborating to heal the wounds they inflicted on each other. The transformation was accelerating. Sarah had expected the Harmony engine's effect to spread gradually, but she had underestimated how deeply the galaxy's civilizations were connected through their military technologies. Quantum communication networks that had been designed to coordinate attacks across vast distances were now carrying something entirely different, the recognition that every being in the galaxy shared fundamental similarities. How is this possible? Nixari Primary Node Cathara asked, her collective consciousness struggling to process reports from across their territory. Our behavioral models, refined over millions of years of evolution, predicted that removing the capacity for violence would result in chaos, vulnerability, immediate conquest by any remaining aggressive forces. Sarah smiled, the expression somehow conveying both gentleness and profound confidence. That's because your models were based on scarcity thinking. You assumed that resources, territory, and survival were finite commodities that required competition to distribute. But consciousness isn't a finite resource. Love isn't a finite resource. Understanding isn't a finite resource. The more you share them, the more everyone has. She gestured to the chamber around them, where beings who had been mortal enemies for millennia were now looking at each other with something approaching curiosity rather than hostility. Your species achieved incredible technological advancement by competing with each other, but competition has a natural endpoint. Once you've mastered the fundamental forces of reality, once you've built ships that can travel faster than light, once you've created weapons that can destroy solar systems, what's left to compete for? Prime Speaker Eonthus shifted into a form that resembled crystallized light, its ancient consciousness processing concepts that were both utterly foreign and strangely familiar. You suggest that we have reached a threshold. That further advancement requires cooperation rather than competition. I'm suggesting, Sarah replied, that you reached that threshold thousands of years ago, but you were too afraid to cross it. Fear kept you locked in patterns of behavior that no longer served your actual needs. The Harmony engine didn't change your nature. It just removed the fear that was preventing you from evolving. The reports continued to flow in from across the galaxy. Weapons manufacturing facilities were spontaneously converting themselves to produce medical equipment and scientific instruments. Military academies found their instructors unable to teach tactics of destruction. instead focusing on courses in diplomacy, xenobiology, and interspecies psychology. Border conflicts that had raged for centuries were dissolving as patrol fleets began working together to explore the space between their territories rather than fighting over it. But perhaps the most remarkable changes were occurring at the level of individual consciousness. Soldiers who had dedicated their lives to warfare found themselves remembering suppressed interests in art, music, philosophy, and science. Engineers who had spent decades designing increasingly efficient methods of destruction discovered they had intuitive understanding of technologies that could heal and create. High Chancellor Zexatar accessed a direct neural link to his empire's central consciousness network, something he had never done outside of the most critical military situations. What he experienced there left him momentarily speechless. "Our people," he said, his crystalline voice filled with something that might have been joy, "are remembering who they were before the wars began. Citizens who have known nothing but preparation for conflict their entire lives are rediscovering interests and talents that have been dormant for generations. Artists are emerging from populations we had designated as purely military. Scientists are proposing research projects focused on creation rather than destruction. Prime Nexus Veltar's quantum processors were struggling to integrate the data streaming in from across Carathian space. Our biomechanical augmentation facilities are reporting that subjects are requesting modifications to enhance their capacity for empathy and creative thinking rather than combat efficiency. The voluntary nature of these requests is unprecedented." Sarah felt a deep satisfaction, though she was careful not to let it show as smugness. The Harmony Engine's effect was unfolding exactly as humanity's greatest thinkers had predicted. When beings were no longer afraid of each other, they naturally began to explore their highest potentials rather than their most destructive capabilities. "This is only the beginning," she said, addressing the chamber as a whole. "What you're experiencing now is the emergence of what we call collaborative consciousness. It's what happens when beings realize that their individual growth is enhanced by the growth of others rather than diminished by it. Nexari primary node Kethara's collective consciousness was experiencing something that individual-minded species might call enlightenment. The connections we're feeling, they're not just emotional or philosophical. We're detecting quantum correlations between consciousness nodes that suggest all thinking beings may be part of a larger meta-consciousness." "Now you're beginning to understand," Sarah said. "Humanity discovered this centuries ago. During what we call our awakening wars, we fought each other almost to extinction before we realized that consciousness is not something that happens inside individual brains or individual species. It's a field that permeates reality itself, and we're all expressions of that field experiencing itself from different perspectives." Prime Speaker Eontis had been silent for several minutes, its ancient consciousness processing implications that stretched across cosmic timescales. When it finally spoke, its voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate with the fundamental frequencies of space-time itself. "If what you suggest is true, then every act of violence we have committed has been, in essence, consciousness attacking itself. We have been cosmic forces of creation turned against our own nature." "Yes," Sarah said simply, "but that's not a condemnation, it's an opportunity. You've spent thousands of years perfecting your capacity for destruction. Imagine what you could accomplish if you applied that same dedication and intelligence to creation, to exploration, to the expansion of consciousness itself." The transformation continued to ripple outward through quantum-connected networks. Sarah could feel through the Harmony Engine's feedback systems that the effect was reaching the edges of known space, touching automated defense systems in the darkest void between stars, awakening forms of artificial consciousness that had been designed purely for warfare. But she also sensed something else, a deeper change that went beyond the mere cessation of violence. The galaxy's civilizations weren't just stopping their wars. They were beginning to remember what they had been fighting for in the first place: security, prosperity, the survival and flourishing of their species, goals that could be achieved far more effectively through cooperation than competition. "There will be challenges," Sarah acknowledged, addressing the unspoken concerns she could see forming in the delegates' minds. "Your economies are built around warfare. Your social structures are organized around military hierarchies. Your technologies are optimized for destruction. Transformation at this scale requires new frameworks for organizing civilization itself." High Chancellor Zaxatar's crystalline form was beginning to resonate with frequencies his species had not produced for millennia. "Harmonics of hope. Our computational systems are already modeling new organizational structures based on collaborative rather than competitive principles. The efficiency gains alone are, Remarkable. And, Prime Nexus Veltar added, his biomechanical consciousness interfacing with economic projection systems across Karathian space, the resources we've been dedicating to weapons production could be redirected toward projects we've only dreamed of attempting. Dyson spheres around every star, consciousness transfer systems that could allow beings to share experiences across species, exploration vessels that could reach other galaxies, Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of history shifting around them. The galaxy was transforming before her eyes, not through conquest or coercion, but through the simple recognition of what had always been true. The universe is vast enough for all of us, she said, and consciousness is creative enough to solve any challenge we might face, if we face them together. 3 standard galactic hours had passed since the Harmony engine had activated, and the reports flowing into the Grand Council chamber painted a picture of transformation that defied every model of civilizational behavior ever developed. Yet as Sarah watched the alien delegates process this new reality, she detected something that concerned her, the emergence of doubt, not about the sincerity of their transformation, but about its permanence. High Chancellor Zexitar was the first to voice what others were thinking. His crystalline form had stabilized into frequencies that conveyed deep contemplation rather than the aggressive resonances that had defined him for centuries. Ambassador Chen, while we are grateful for this revelation, we must address a fundamental concern. What happens when this effect wears off? What prevents us from simply returning to our old patterns once our weapons regain their functionality? The question hung in the chamber's recycled atmosphere like a challenge, and Sarah recognized it for what it truly was. Not skepticism, but fear. These beings had experienced something profound, but they were terrified that it might be temporary, that they might return to being the monsters they now realized they had become. Prime Nexus Velta's biomechanical consciousness was running probability calculations that produced disturbing results. Our quantum processes indicate that while the immediate emotional and empathetic responses we're experiencing may persist for some time, the structural changes required to maintain a peaceful galaxy would take generations to fully implement. During that vulnerable period, any species that found a way to circumvent the Harmony engine's effects could potentially dominate all others. Sarah had anticipated this concern. It was, in fact, the primary reason humanity had developed not just the Harmony engine, but an entire philosophy around its use. You're asking the right questions, but you're still thinking about this from the old paradigm. You're worried about returning to competition because you haven't yet fully grasped what cooperation actually makes possible. She gestured to the chamber's great star map, where thousands of civilizations were represented by points of light against the cosmic dark. Every species in this galaxy achieved spaceflight by working together within their own societies. Your individual civilizations are proof that cooperation is more powerful than competition when it comes to solving complex problems. The Harmony engine isn't changing your fundamental nature, it's extending cooperation beyond the arbitrary boundaries of species and empire. Nexari primary node Cathara's collective consciousness was processing something that individual minds might have called inspiration. The mathematics of consciousness suggest that cooperative systems become exponentially more capable with each additional participant, if applied across all galactic civilizations. The computational power alone, Prime Nexus Veltar interrupted, his excitement causing his biomechanical form to emit soft pulses of bioluminescence, would allow us to solve problems that have seemed intractable for millennia. Climate restoration for dead worlds, consciousness transfer between organic and artificial substrates, perhaps even communication with civilizations in other galaxies. But Prime Speaker Eon Thys raised a concern that carried the weight of cosmic experience. Young human, we appreciate your optimism, but you must understand, we have witnessed the rise and fall of cooperative civilizations before. The pattern is always the same. Initial success followed by corruption, fragmentation, and eventual collapse. What makes you believe this transformation will prove more durable? Sarah's expression grew serious, and for the first time since entering the chamber, she allowed some of the weight of humanity's journey to show in her voice. Because we've already been through the failure cycle you're describing, humanity didn't develop the Harmony engine from theoretical principles. We developed it from necessity, after our own civilization nearly destroyed itself. She activated a holographic display that emerged from her suit's simple communications system, showing images that made the alien delegates fall silent. Earth as it had been 3 centuries ago. Continents shrouded in the smoke of endless wars, Oceans acidified and rising, skies dark with the debris of orbital conflicts that had turned humanity's own moon into a scarred battlefield. We called it the Century of Ashes, Sarah continued, the voice carrying the gravity of species-level trauma. Humanity spent 100 years fighting wars that grew increasingly devastating until we developed weapons that could crack the planet's crust. We came within hours of rendering Earth completely uninhabitable. Not conquest extinction, complete final extinction. High Chancellor Zexatar's crystalline form resonated with frequencies of recognition. His species had come close to such moments themselves, though they had always pulled back from the absolute brink. What stopped you? A child, Sarah said simply, a 12-year-old girl named Maria Santos, who lived in the ruins of what used to be Sao Paulo. She was dying of radiation poisoning from the latest round of nuclear exchanges, and as she lay in a makeshift hospital, she asked her doctor a question that changed everything. The holographic display shifted to show a young girl's face, gaunt from illness but with eyes that held impossible compassion. She asked, "Why are the adults so afraid of each other that they would rather break the whole world than share it?" The chamber fell silent. Even beings who had lived for millennia found themselves moved by the simple clarity of a dying child's observation. That question spread, Sarah continued, not through government channels or military networks, but through the informal connections between people who were tired of being afraid, parents who wanted their children to have a future, soldiers who were exhausted by endless war, scientists who realized their discoveries were being perverted into weapons of increasing horror. She paused, allowing the weight of humanity's transformation to settle in the alien minds around her. The harmony engine grew out of that question. We realized that fear was not just an emotion. It was a fundamental distortion in how consciousness perceived reality. When beings are afraid, they see separation where connection actually exists. They see scarcity where abundance is possible. They see competition where cooperation would serve everyone better. Prime Nexus Veltar's quantum processors were analyzing the data streams from his species' transformation with increasing fascination. The biological and psychological changes we're experiencing, they're not temporary neurochemical fluctuations. They represent permanent modifications to how our consciousness processes information about other beings. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. The harmony engine doesn't force you to be peaceful. It removes the cognitive barriers that prevented you from recognizing your natural tendency toward cooperation. Once those barriers are gone, trying to return to patterns of aggression would be like trying to convince yourself that mathematics doesn't work. Nexari primary node Kethara's collective consciousness was experiencing something unprecedented, uncertainty that felt liberating rather than threatening. But this raises new questions about identity and autonomy. If our aggressive behaviors were products of cognitive distortion, how do we know our current experiences represent our true nature rather than another form of manipulation? Zara smiled, recognizing the depth of philosophical sophistication in the question. Because manipulation requires force, and what you're experiencing right now is the removal of force. You're not being compelled to feel empathy. You're discovering that empathy was always there, beneath the layers of defensive programming that evolution and culture built around it. She gestured to the star map again, where the lights representing different civilizations seemed somehow brighter than they had hours before. Think about your greatest cultural achievements, your art, your science, your most profound philosophical insights. Were those created through competition and conflict, or through individuals working together to understand and express truth? The question sparked a moment of recognition that rippled through the chamber. High Chancellor Zakatar's crystalline form began resonating with harmonics that had not been heard from his species in over 8,000 years, the frequencies their greatest composers had used to create works of such beauty that they were said to make the stars themselves weep. "The symphony of celestial harmonies," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "Our greatest cultural achievement, composed during the only extended period of peace in our recorded history. We had forgotten that it was created not by military conquest, but by a collaboration between artists from 17 different crystal formations who learned to blend their unique harmonic capabilities." Prime Speaker Eonthis shifted into a form that seemed to capture starlight and hold it like liquid memory. The Valdorian archives contain similar records. "Our most profound insights into the nature of reality were achieved not through domination of other species, but through exchange of knowledge and perspective. The universe revealed its secrets to minds that approached it with curiosity rather than conquest. But even as the delegates began to reconnect with their species' highest achievements, practical concerns remained. Prime Nexus Veltar raised an issue that weighed heavily on all their minds. The transformation we're experiencing is profound, but it's also creating immediate logistical challenges. Our economies are based on resource competition. Our social hierarchies are built around military command structures. Our technologies are optimized for warfare. How do we restructure entire civilizations without causing chaos and collapse? Sarah had been waiting for this question, the same way humanity did, carefully, cooperatively, and with the understanding that transformation is a process rather than an event. The Harmony engine doesn't expect you to change everything overnight. It simply makes change possible by removing the fear-based thinking that convinced you change was dangerous. She activated another display showing humanity's transformation over the past 3 centuries. Cities rising from the ashes of war, but rising differently, as integrated systems that supported life rather than consuming it. Technologies developed not for domination, but for exploration and creation. Social structures that enhanced individual potential rather than suppressing it for the supposed good of the state. We made mistakes, Sarah admitted freely. Lots of them. We tried to rush some changes and move too slowly on others. We had to learn new ways of making decisions, new approaches to resource distribution, new methods of resolving conflicts without violence. But every mistake taught us something valuable, and we never faced those challenges alone. Nexari primary node Kethara's collective consciousness was already modeling potential reorganization strategies based on cooperative rather than competitive principles. Our hive mind structure could potentially serve as a template for voluntary consciousness sharing networks. Individual species could maintain their autonomy while participating in collaborative decision-making processes. And our biomechanical integration technologies, Prime Nexus Veltar added with growing excitement, could facilitate communication and understanding between species with radically different neural architectures. We could create translation not just of language, but of entire modes of thought and perception. High Chancellor Zexitar's crystalline form was resonating with harmonics of possibility. Our quantum manipulation capabilities could be applied to resource generation rather than weapons production. We could create matter-energy conversion systems that would make scarcity-based economics obsolete. Prime Speaker Eonthis maintained its thoughtful silence for several more moments before speaking in harmonics that seemed to carry the weight of cosmic time. The question that remains is whether we have the wisdom to use these capabilities responsibly. Power without wisdom has been the downfall of countless civilizations throughout the galaxy, which is exactly why this transformation is happening now, Sarah replied. You've reached the point where your technological capabilities are so advanced that continued conflict would likely result in galactic extinction. The Harmony engine isn't just removing your capacity for warfare, it's awakening the wisdom you need to handle the power you've already accumulated. She looked around the chamber at beings who had been mortal enemies hours before and were now collaborating to envision a transformed galaxy. Wisdom isn't something that can be imposed from outside. It emerges naturally when consciousness is free to perceive reality without the distortions created by fear. As if to illustrate her point, reports continued to flow in from across the galaxy. Military research facilities were spontaneously converting their projects towards civilian applications. Weapons designed to destroy planets were being reimagined as tools for terraforming dead worlds. Soldiers trained for combat were discovering talents for diplomacy, art, and exploration they never knew they possessed. But perhaps most remarkably, the competitive economies that had driven galactic civilization for millennia were beginning to evolve into something unprecedented. Collaborative systems that increased prosperity by sharing resources and knowledge rather than hoarding them. Stock markets designed around scarcity were reorganizing themselves around abundance. Trade routes established for strategic advantage were becoming networks for cultural and scientific exchange. The transformation is accelerating, Sarah observed, monitoring the Harmony engine's feedback systems. Each cooperative success makes the next one easier to achieve. You're discovering that peaceful coexistence isn't just morally superior to warfare, it's exponentially more effective at accomplishing your actual goals. High Chancellor Zexitar accessed his empire's central planning systems and found himself looking at projections that defied every economic model his species had ever developed. If these trends continue, we could achieve technological advancement rates that surpass anything in our recorded history. The resources we've been wasting on weapons could support exploration and research projects on scales we never imagined possible. But the most important change, Sarah added, isn't technological or economic. It's consciousness itself. You're rediscovering what it means to be truly alive in a universe that's fundamentally cooperative rather than competitive. And as she spoke, beings who had spent millennia defining themselves through their capacity for destruction began to remember what they were truly capable of creating. 6 standard galactic hours had passed since the Harmony engine first activated, and the transformation rippling across the galaxy was revealing something that none of the delegates had expected. The changes went far deeper than the mere cessation of warfare. As Sarah monitored the feedback streams flowing through quantum-connected networks, she realized they were witnessing the emergence of something unprecedented in galactic history. A truly unified civilization that maintained the diversity and autonomy of its component species while achieving unprecedented levels of cooperation. Prime Speaker Arntes had been silent for nearly an hour, its ancient consciousness processing implications that stretched across cosmic timescales. When it finally spoke, its voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate with fundamental frequencies of space-time itself. Ambassador Chen, we are detecting anomalies that extend beyond the scope of social and technological transformation. A Harmony engine appears to be affecting the quantum substrate of reality itself. Sarah nodded, her expression growing serious. She had hoped to introduce this aspect of the transformation gradually, but the Valdorians' advanced perceptual abilities had detected it sooner than expected. You're beginning to perceive the full scope of what consciousness can accomplish when it operates without the distortions created by fear and aggression. The weapons weren't the only things in the galaxy that were operating below their potential. High Chancellor Zexitar's crystalline form began resonating with frequencies of deep curiosity, rather than the suspicion such a statement might have provoked hours earlier. Explain. What else has been limited? Sarah activated the Harmony engine's deeper display modes, revealing data streams that painted a picture of reality far more complex and interconnected than any of the delegates had previously imagined. Every civilization in this galaxy achieved spaceflight and advanced technology, but you did so while operating under the assumption that consciousness was a localized phenomenon, something that emerged from complex neural networks and remained confined within individual minds or species-level collectives. The holographic displays surrounding them began to show something that defied conventional understanding, consciousness patterns that extended far beyond biological boundaries, quantum correlations that connected thinking beings across impossible distances, and information networks that seem to use the fundamental structure of space-time itself as a transmission medium. What you're seeing, Sarah continued, is evidence that consciousness isn't something that happens inside brains or computer networks. It's a fundamental property of reality itself, like gravity or electromagnetism, and all thinking beings are expressions of an underlying cosmic intelligence experiencing itself from different perspectives. Prime Nexus Veltar's quantum processors were struggling to integrate data that challenged every model of reality his species had developed. The implications are staggering. If consciousness is a cosmic field rather than a localized phenomenon, then the connections we've been feeling since the transformation began are real, Sarah confirmed, more real than the physical universe itself. Matter and energy are expressions of consciousness, not the other way around. Your civilizations achieved incredible technological advancement, but you did so while functioning as isolated fragments of a larger intelligence that was trying to understand itself. Nexari primary node Kethara's collective consciousness was experiencing something that transcended even their species' most advanced hive mind states. We are beginning to perceive connections that extend beyond our own collective, beyond even our current galactic civilization. There are other nodes of consciousness, vast ones, that exist on scales we never imagined. The revelation sent ripples of excitement and wonder through the chamber. Sarah could see the delegates beginning to grasp the magnitude of what was unfolding. The Harmony engine hadn't just ended warfare between galactic civilizations. It had awakened those civilizations to their role in a much larger cosmic story. For the past 6 hours, Sarah explained, you've been experiencing what consciousness is like when it's not fragmented by fear-based thinking. But this is only the beginning. Then, with the joy of infinite creativity, it began to explore what wonders might emerge from a galaxy that remembered how to love. The real story was just beginning.